It was supposed to be a love story, the kind you read about in fairy tales, the kind everyone dreams about. I thought I had found the one. We were inseparable, laughing, sharing our hopes, dreams, and fears. But over time, something shifted. The small, charming quirks that I once adored became the very things that chipped away at my soul. I should have seen it earlier, but love has a way of blinding you. It started subtly, like a whisper in the wind, small manipulations, tiny jabs that seemed innocent at first. She would tell me how lucky I was to be with her, how I'd never find someone else like her. And at first, I thought it was sweet, that maybe she just cared too much. But soon, the compliments began to feel like chains, wrapping themselves around my every move. She would belittle my friends, make snide comments about my family, and tell me that I didn't need anyone else. It was as if she was trying to isolate me from everything I loved, to mold me into something I wasn't. I ignored it at first. Maybe I was just overthinking things. But it didn't take long before the guilt trip started. "You never care about me like you used to," she would say, with that sad, pleading look in her eyes. "You're slipping away from me." And just like that, I felt the weight of her words, even though I knew deep down they weren't true. I had become her world, her everything. And somehow, I didn't realize it was slowly killing me. Then came the threats. She wasn't overt about it at first, but she would drop hints about how she'd be devastated if something ever happened between us. She'd say, "If you ever left me, I don't know what I'd do. I don't think I could live with myself." And those words haunted me. I began to feel trapped, like there was no way out of this love story gone wrong. It wasn't just emotional. The manipulation became more tactical. If I wanted to go out with friends, there was always a problem. "Don't you love me enough to stay in tonight?" she would ask, her voice soft but carrying that tone of finality. If I ever tried to do something for myself, even something as small as taking a break from work, it would turn into a problem. "You're always putting everyone else first," she'd say, the guilt gnawing at me. "Don't you want to spend time with me?" And I would. I always did. But the more I gave, the more she took, until I barely recognized myself anymore. I began questioning my reality. Was I the one at fault? Was I overreacting? No matter what I did, it was never enough. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to please her, to avoid her wrath. But nothing worked. She became possessive, where I went, who I saw, what I did. It felt like I had no freedom left, like I was a prisoner in a gilded cage I had built myself. But what hurt most was the way she twisted things. She had a knack for making me believe that her outbursts, her tears, her anger were all my fault. "If only you loved me more," she would say, or, "if you cared about me, you'd understand." And I did understand. I understood too well. But the love I once felt was being suffocated by her constant demands and emotional blackmail. It wasn't just the emotional turmoil. The psychological games she played were far darker. The gaslighting, making me doubt my own thoughts, memories, and emotions, was a constant. I remember one time we had a fight. A small one, but it was enough to set her off. I tried to explain how I felt, how she was crossing boundaries, but she turned it around on me. "You're crazy," she said. "You're imagining things. I never said that." And for a moment I started to believe her. I began questioning my perception of reality, wondering if maybe I was the problem all along. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't me. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to escape. It was like being in a storm, with the winds howling around me, the thunder crashing. But every time I tried to leave, I was pulled back in. Each time I tried to voice my concerns, to say that things weren't right, I was met with tears, with apologies, with promises that things would change. But nothing ever changed. It only got worse. Looking back, I can see how everything slowly unfolded. The charm, the love, the devotion, it was all part of the act, part of the manipulation. The person I fell in love with was never really her. She was a mask, a facade, hiding the true darkness within. I was just too blind to see it until it was too late. And now, after everything that happened, I still can't shake the feeling of being haunted by her. Not physically, she's gone now, but emotionally, mentally, it feels like she's always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. The scars she left on me are deep, and the darkness she brought into my life lingers, even now. It's a nightmare that never really ends, because the effects of a toxic ex-partner don't disappear when they do. They stay with you, shaping how you see the world, how you trust people, how you live your life. The twisted irony is that, even after everything, I still find myself missing the person she pretended to be. That's how deep the manipulation went, how deeply she embedded herself into my life. And even now I wonder, how could I have been so blind? How could I have let it go on for so long? This is the story of what happened to me. But it's not just my story. It's the story of countless others who have been trapped in toxic, destructive relationships. It's a reminder of how easily we can lose ourselves in someone else's darkness, and how hard it can be to find our way back to the light. It was just a normal evening when the first thing happened. I had no idea that what seemed like a small issue at the time would spiral into something much darker. It started with a text from her, just like any other evening, except this one felt different. The message read, "I miss you. Why haven't you been answering my calls?" It was simple, direct, and to be honest, not unusual. But something about it made me uneasy. The tone felt off. I had spent the entire day working and hadn't had a chance to respond, but I never thought it would be an issue. But the text stuck with me. Why the sudden sense of urgency? And why did I feel a sense of dread creeping in? I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just her usual clinginess. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Later that evening, I decided to call her back. I dialed her number, and after a few rings, she picked up. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Sorry, I was working." "What's up?" There was a long pause before she responded. "You don't care anymore, do you?" she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You're slipping away from me. I can feel it. You've been distant lately. Don't you love me anymore?" Her words were like a slap in the face, but there was something else in her tone. Something sharp and cutting, like a knife to the heart. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's not that. I've just been busy. You know how things have been with work." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the full truth. I had been avoiding her more and more, but not because I didn't love her. It was because I was scared of the way she had been acting, scared of how controlling and manipulative she had become. "I don't believe you," she replied, her voice trembling. "You never make time for me anymore. You don't love me the way you used to. You're just like the others. You'll leave me, just like everyone else. You'll abandon me." The last words hung in the air, a bitter, almost venomous accusation. I tried to reassure her. That's not true. I'm not going anywhere. I just need space, that's all. We can talk about this tomorrow. But before I could say anything else, she hung up on me. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the screen of my phone. Her words echoed in my mind. You'll leave me, just like everyone else. It was as though she had already made up her mind about the outcome, and I was just a piece of her sad, twisted narrative. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. But there was a sense of impending doom, a feeling that I couldn't escape. The next day I tried to act normal. I went through my day, trying to focus on work and push her out of my mind. But every time I looked at my phone, I saw her name flashing on the screen. Her messages were coming faster now, more frantic. Why aren't you responding? Are you seeing someone else? What's going on? I know you're hiding something from me. The messages didn't stop. It was relentless, like an attack on my every waking moment. By the time I finally managed to text her back, I could feel the weight of the conversation hanging over me. I told you. I just need some space. Please give me that. It felt like I was pleading with her, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could handle it. She was starting to unravel, and I didn't know how to stop it. The constant barrage of texts, the accusations, the guilt trips, they were all becoming too much. That night, I decided I had to take a break. I couldn't go on like this. I needed some time away from her. So I went to a friend's house, hoping to clear my head and get some perspective. But the second I walked through the door, my phone buzzed. It was her again, a message that sent a chill down my spine. You think you can escape me? I know where you are. The blood drained from my face. I quickly checked the message, but I didn't understand. How could she possibly know? I hadn't said a word to anyone about where I was going. I texted her back, my hands trembling. How do you know where I am? There was no reply for a few minutes, just silence. Then another message came through. It was a photo of me, taken earlier that day. My heart stopped. It was a picture of me walking down the street, clearly visible in the background. But there was something wrong. I hadn't seen anyone around me when I was walking. It was as though she had been following me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She had been tracking me, watching my every move. Panic set in. I grabbed my coat and rushed outside, but as I stepped into the cold night air, I heard a sound behind me. It was a soft, almost imperceptible click. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. Was someone there? I turned around, my eyes scanning the dimly lit street, but I saw nothing. Only the faint glow of streetlights. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't know what was happening, but I could feel the tension building. She wasn't just emotionally manipulating me anymore. She was becoming something else entirely. Someone dangerous. Later that night, as I sat in my friend's apartment, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, another message came through. This time, it was a video. It showed me sitting in the living room, talking to my friend. The camera angle was off, too high, like someone had filmed it from above, hidden somewhere. I could see the dim light from the ceiling above me, but no one was visible in the shot. I felt my stomach twist. I hadn't noticed anything unusual at the time, but now I realized that someone had been right there, watching me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't just a toxic ex. She had become obsessed, consumed by jealousy. And this was no longer just a breakup. This was something dark, something far more sinister. I tried calling her again, desperate to confront her, to make her understand. But when she picked up, her voice wasn't the soft, pleading tone I had heard before. It was cold, emotionless. "You don't get it, do you? You're mine, and you'll never be able to escape me." Her words sent a cold shiver down my spine. "You're sick," I said, my voice shaking. "This isn't love. This is obsession. You need help." But she only laughed. "Help? I don't need help. You're the one who needs help, running from me, pushing me away. You think you can just leave me behind? No one ever leaves me." The call ended, and I was left staring at the phone, my heart pounding. I knew I had to get away from her, but I didn't know how. She wasn't just emotionally manipulating me anymore. She was stalking me. She was planning something, and I couldn't figure out what. I was trapped in her web, and I didn't know how to escape it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Her eyes filled with rage and obsession. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to loom closer. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, watching me, waiting. I had no idea how far this would go, but deep down, I knew one thing. This wasn't going to end well. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next, as I tried to carry on with my life. But the weight of what was happening hung over me. I was no longer living freely. Every moment felt heavy, laden with a constant awareness of her presence, even when I couldn't see her. The texts, the calls, the photos, the videos. It was like she had become a part of the shadows that followed me, a whisper in the corners of my mind. The fear I felt was tangible, a presence that had seeped into every corner of my life, even the mundane moments. I tried to distract myself, to go through the motions of my routine, but no matter where I went, it felt like she was there, watching. I began to feel paranoid, wondering if I was being followed every time I stepped outside. I started locking the doors obsessively, pulling the curtains closed even during the day. I installed security cameras, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was always a step ahead of me. It was as though she knew everything I did, everything I thought, before I even did. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon when I received another message from her. This one was different. It was a single, cryptic sentence. "I know where you are. I'll be waiting." My heart sank. What did that mean? Where was she? And why did it feel like it wasn't a threat, but a promise? I immediately checked my security cameras, but there was nothing unusual. No one had entered the perimeter of my house. Still, the message gnawed at me, its weight sinking deeper into my chest. I tried calling my friend, the one I'd been staying with, but he didn't answer. Panic set in as I realized I had no one to turn to. I felt completely isolated. That night, unable to stay in my apartment any longer, I decided to leave. I grabbed my things, hoping to find some solace elsewhere. Anywhere but here. But the moment I stepped out of the door, I froze. Standing at the end of the hallway, staring directly at me with a haunting intensity, was a figure. A silhouette in the dark, just beyond the threshold of the street lamp. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart skipped a beat. It was her. She was standing there, motionless, just watching me. I couldn't see her face clearly, but the cold, suffocating aura of her presence was unmistakable. I didn't know how she had gotten there. I had locked all the doors, all the windows. There was no way she could have entered without me noticing. But there she was, an apparition made real, a nightmare come to life. I stood frozen, my legs unwilling to move. Was this real? Was she really here? Or had my mind finally cracked under the pressure of her stalking? I reached for my phone, my hand trembling. But before I could dial, I heard her voice, soft but chilling, as though she had somehow seeped into the very air around me. "You can't run away from me," she said, her voice carrying through the night, wrapping itself around my soul like a suffocating cord. "I told you, you'll never escape me." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her, couldn't break the connection. It felt like a spell had been cast upon me, binding me in place. And then, as if sensing my paralysis, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she walked toward me, her footsteps echoing in the silence. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs were frozen. She was getting closer, closer still, and I could see her more clearly now. Her eyes glowed in the darkness, not with love, but with something far darker: obsession, malice, and a twisted sense of control. I could see the faintest trace of a smile on her lips, but it wasn't a smile of affection. It was a smile of victory. "You thought you could leave," she whispered, standing just inches from me now. "You thought you could escape, but you're mine. Always were. Always will be." I opened my mouth to speak, to beg, to tell her how wrong she was, but no words came. It was as if she had stolen my voice, stolen my very will to fight back. I wanted to scream, to demand that she leave me alone, but my throat felt tight, as though the air itself was being sucked from my lungs. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. One moment she was there, her presence suffocating and oppressive, and the next, she had vanished into the night, leaving me standing in a daze. For the first time in weeks, I was able to move. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Was it a hallucination? Had I imagined it? I ran into my apartment, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the floor. I had no idea how long I sat there, lost in my thoughts, my mind reeling from the encounter. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just a toxic relationship. This was something far darker, something that I couldn't understand, something I didn't know how to fight. The days that followed were even worse. The texts and calls from her didn't stop, but now they were more frequent, more aggressive. She was no longer content with just watching me. Now she was trying to break into my life in every way she could. The texts were no longer just accusations. Now they were threats. "I'll make you suffer the way you made me suffer," she wrote one night. "You think you can leave me? I'll make sure you never forget me. Ever." I knew I had to do something, anything, to get away from her. I started researching restraining orders, security measures, anything that might help. But nothing felt like it would be enough. It was as if she was always one step ahead, anticipating my every move. Then came the plot twist, the real twist that would shatter everything I thought I knew. One evening, I received an unexpected package in the mail. There was no return address, no clue as to who it could be from. When I opened it, my stomach turned. Inside was a journal, a small leather-bound notebook, worn and old. My name was written on the cover, but the handwriting wasn't mine. It was hers. I hesitated before flipping it open. But something inside me told me I had to know. As I read through the pages, my blood ran cold. The journal was filled with entries detailing every moment we had spent together. But it wasn't just about us. It was about everything she had done, everything she had planned. The pages were filled with dark, twisted thoughts, things I had never known about her, the depths of her obsession, the manipulation, the control. It was clear that she had been planning this for much longer than I had realized. The things I had chalked up to coincidence, her sudden appearances, the surveillance, the relentless texts, were all part of a carefully orchestrated game. She had been watching me long before I even realized what was happening. And then, at the very end of the journal, was the final entry, one that sent chills down my spine. I will have him back. No matter the cost, he will be mine again, forever. I dropped the journal in horror, my heart racing. I couldn't breathe. I had been wrong about everything. This wasn't just a toxic relationship. This wasn't just a woman scorned. This was something much more terrifying. I had no idea what she was capable of, but I knew one thing for sure. Now, I was in far more danger than I had ever imagined. The real horror was just beginning. I woke up with a start, the remnants of a nightmare clinging to me like a shadow. My heart raced, and for a brief moment, I thought it was all just a bad dream, a twisted nightmare that I could shake off. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, reality slowly crept back into my mind. The fear, the paranoia, the feeling that I was constantly being watched. It wasn't a dream. It was my life now. Every day felt like a battle, but I had no choice but to keep moving forward. I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was coming for me. I had done everything I could think of to protect myself. Changed my locks, installed more cameras, and even moved to a different part of town. But none of it seemed to matter. It was as if she was always one step ahead. The texts kept coming, the calls, the anonymous gifts left at my door. It was relentless. And yet, despite everything, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the hope that one day it would end, that somehow I would find the courage to confront her and finally end this twisted game she was playing with me. But then it happened. It was a quiet evening when I received a message. At first, it seemed like one of her usual texts, cryptic, chilling, but nothing I hadn't seen before. But as I read the message, my heart skipped a beat. This time, it wasn't a threat. It wasn't an accusation. It was something far more sinister. You know what I want. Come meet me, or I'll make sure you regret it forever. I froze, my fingers trembling as I stared at the phone screen. She had never said anything like this before. There was no question now. She was coming for me. I could feel it in my bones, like a storm brewing on the horizon. My skin prickled with dread, and my mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Should I call the police? Should I try to run again? Nothing felt like it would be enough to protect me from the terror she was capable of. I spent the entire night staring at my phone, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. The next day I decided to go to the police. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed help. But even as I drove to the station, a part of me knew it was pointless. I knew they couldn't protect me from someone who was already so deep in my life. But I had to try. When I arrived, I was escorted into a small room where I was told to explain everything. I told them about the messages, the stalking, the fear that had taken over my life. The officer took notes, nodding along as I spoke, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe me. How could he? How could anyone believe something so unreal? But I had no choice but to tell my story. As I left the police station, I felt a strange sense of unease settle over me. It wasn't that I felt hopeful about the investigation. It was more the sense that something was coming, something worse than I had already experienced. Later that night, when I returned home, I found something that made my blood run cold. On my doorstep, under the faint light of the street lamp, was an envelope. It was plain, unmarked, and sealed with black wax. My heart thudded in my chest as I bent down to pick it up. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, and when I opened it, my hands trembled. It was a picture of me, taken from a distance but unmistakably me, and written on the back were two words: your time. That was when I knew. She wasn't just trying to intimidate me anymore. She was closing in. I had to act fast. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. I tried to track down any information I could on her, hoping to find something, anything, that would give me a way to stop this madness. I reached out to old friends, tried to piece together fragments of the past, but every lead I followed ended in a dead end. It was like she had erased herself from existence, leaving no trace of who she truly was. I felt like I was fighting an invisible enemy. And then it happened. I was walking home one night, trying to get some air after days of being cooped up inside, when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, but the feeling didn't go away. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one there, just the empty street. Yet, the feeling of dread only intensified. As I reached my building, I noticed something strange, a shadow in the corner of my eye. I turned just in time to see a figure dart into an alleyway. It was her. I didn't hesitate, I ran. My heart pounded as I sprinted through the streets, trying to outrun her. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. My legs burned, but I pushed myself harder, turning down alleyways, running through parks, anything to put distance between me and her. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, just behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I finally reached my apartment building, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I burst through the door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it with trembling hands. But even then, the fear didn't go away. I knew she was out there, waiting. The next morning, I was woken by the sound of my phone ringing. It was a call from an unknown number. My stomach twisted in knots as I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. "You think you can hide from me?" It was her voice, cold and mocking. "You think this is over? It's just beginning." Before I could respond, she hung up. I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything without feeling her presence lurking in the background. Every knock at the door made my heart skip a beat. Every creak of the floorboards sent me into a panic. And then, the final straw came. I returned home from a meeting one afternoon to find my apartment completely ransacked. Everything was overturned. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor. But the worst part was what I found on the kitchen table. A bloodied knife. It wasn't just a message anymore. It was a threat. She had crossed the line, and I knew in that moment that I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't keep hiding. I had to confront her. With no plan, no strategy, I found myself standing outside her apartment building that night, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to do something to end this nightmare. I climbed the steps to her apartment and stood in front of the door, my heart racing. I knocked. Once, twice. Nothing. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The apartment was pristine. Too pristine. It looked like no one had lived there in years. The walls were bare, the furniture absent. But the most chilling part was the room at the end of the hallway. It was open, and in the center of the room stood a single chair, and in that chair sat a mannequin. It was wearing a shirt that I recognized, a shirt I had worn. My heart skipped a beat as I walked closer. The mannequin's face was eerily realistic, but it wasn't just any face. It was my face. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me like a wave. She had been controlling me, manipulating me. Every step I took, every move I made. She had been preparing for this moment all along. And now, it was my turn to face the consequences of her twisted obsession. But I wasn't ready to give in. I wouldn't let her win. Not this time. I knew now that the only way to end this nightmare was to destroy everything she had built. Her illusions, her manipulation, her twisted need for control. But to do that, I would have to confront the darkest parts of myself. And in doing so, I would finally break free from the chains she had wrapped around my soul. And that was exactly what I intended to do.